Hey guys, welcome to the very last lesson of Bio 20. Today we're just going to be talking about how muscles work. So for this lesson on muscles, we're going to be going over the different types of muscles. We're going to be going over some of the terms related to skeletal muscles and the motor system, as well as the structure of muscles. You also have to explain the sliding filament theory, as well as how muscle contraction is based on things like ATP, calcium ions, and neurotransmitters. We're going to briefly talk about the causes of muscle fatigue and summation. Summation you might remember from the nervous system way back. Actually, no, you're going to talk more about summation in Bio 30, at the start of Bio 30. And then we're also going to talk about the difference between slow twitch and fast twitch muscles. There are over 600 different muscles in the body, and they can all be divided into 3 different categories: cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle is just the muscle of the heart that contracts automatically in order to make the heart beat. Smooth muscle is the muscle that lines the inside of some organs and also contracts automatically. So that would be like the peristalsis that happens in your digestive system, stuff like that. And then your skeletal muscles are the muscles that attach to the bones of your skeleton, and they're under voluntary control. So you can decide when to move those muscles, and they generally contract to move like a body part. Here's some different terms relating to skeletal muscles. So tendon attaches skeletal muscle to bones. Antagonistic muscles are pairs of muscles that work against one another to move a body part. So for example, your bicep and your tricep, one which contracts to bend your arm, one which contracts to straighten your arm, are antagonistic muscles. The flexor is the muscle that contracts to bend a joint. So for example, your bicep, that you have to like flex your bicep to bend your arm. And then extensors are skeletal muscles that contract to straighten a joint, like your tricep, which contracts to straighten your arm. The origin is where the skeletal muscle attaches to a stationary bone, and then the insertion is where the skeletal muscle attaches to a moving bone. So for example, still talking about your upper arm there, you would have the tendon that attaches to your shoulder, that's attaching to a part that's not moving. That would be the origin. And then the tendon that attaches to your lower arm would be the insertion, because that's the part that's actually moving when you contract either your bicep or your tricep. Skeletal muscles are, of course, made up of a bunch of different structures. The skeletal muscle is made up of bundles called muscle fibers. Each individual muscle cell contains a bunch of different nuclei. They don't just have one nucleus. And all of those bundles of muscle fibers together are called the fascicle. The fibers are then surrounded by a membrane called the sarcolemma. And then myofilaments are bundles of contractile proteins within those muscle fibers. And there's 2 different types of myofilaments. There are the thin myofilaments made of actin and the thick myofilaments made of myosin. So this is kind of what this would look like as a cross section here. So this whole thing is the muscle. As you can see, you have a bundle of muscle fibers, which is called the fascicle. Each one of those individual muscle fibers is wrapped with that membrane, the sarcolemma. And then the muscle fiber is made up of these individual myofilaments, which are the actin and myosin. And this is just another way to look at it up here. So we have your muscle fiber. So again, that would just be this thing right here. So a whole bunch of these muscle fibers would combine together to make the fascicle, and then the fascicles group together to make the actual muscle itself. But yeah, so this is the muscle fiber. This little black thing here is the nucleus, which looks gross to me. I think it looks like a slug, or not a slug, a leech. Anyway, and then the myofilaments make up the muscle fiber. The sliding filament theory is the theory that describes how muscles actually contract. Muscles shorten by contracting in order to cause movement. There's something called the Z lines, which separate the different regions of muscle fibers, and the myofilaments connect to the Z lines at their ends. So each end of a myofilament, either the myosin or actin, connects to a Z line. And then the actin myofilaments slide over the myosin myofilaments, hence why it's called the sliding filament theory. So what happens is the myosin reaches out and it attaches onto the actin filament and then pulls the actin towards it, which shortens the distance between the Z lines, therefore contracting that muscle fiber. And then the myosin detaches and then reaches out and grabs the actin and pulls it. So the way this works is calcium bonds with troponin on the actin myofilaments. That pulls the tropomyosin away from the actin, which opens up a binding site on the actin. The myosin then binds to ATP, which causes the myosin to stretch out as it converts that ATP into ADP and phosphate. That myosin is then going to bind to that open binding site on the actin, and then it pulls the actin towards it, which again contracts the muscle fiber. This is kind of what it looks like here. So the myosin is the green myofilament, and this pink myofilament is the actin. And as you can see, you have this molecule called tropomyosin that wraps around the outside of the actin. That's the blue here. And then attached to the tropomyosin is this red molecule called troponin. So what happens is this calcium ion comes in and it attaches to the troponin. When it attaches to the troponin, it pulls the troponin upwards. And because the troponin is attached to the tropomyosin, that blue rope, it also pulls that blue rope upwards. And underneath that tropomyosin, that blue rope, is a binding site. So when the calcium bonds to the troponin, it pulls the tropomyosin away from the actin, opens up that bonding site. And that's where this myosin comes in. The myosin is going to bond to ATP, which causes it to reach out and grab on to that open binding site. And then the ATP is converted into ADP and phosphate. And that release of energy as we break the ATP into ADP and phosphate causes the myosin to be able to pull the actin, therefore contracting the muscle. So you can kind of see that working down here. This is the ATP bonding to the myosin. The myosin then reaches backwards and grabs on to the actin and then pulls backwards, which we can see happening here, that kind of pulling backwards of the actin, which happens as the ADP is broken apart and released. So in order for muscles to contract, you of course need that ATP. The myosin is not able to change shape to reach out and grab onto the actin if the ATP energy isn't there. You also need the calcium ions to bond to that troponin on the actin in order to pull the tropomyosin away from the actin and open up that binding site underneath. The release of calcium ions is triggered by a neurotransmitter that is released from a nerve cell and then goes to the muscle cells. The calcium ions are actually stored in a specialized endoplasmic reticulum in the muscle cell. And then after the muscle cell contracts, the calcium ions can be reabsorbed into the endoplasmic reticulum so they can be like reused later. Muscle fatigue happens when lactic acid builds up in the muscle. As we talked about when we were going over like cellular respiration, if there's not enough oxygen present for aerobic cellular respiration, cells will switch to anaerobic cellular respiration, which produces lactic acid as a byproduct. And that buildup of lactic acid is what causes your muscles to fatigue. Essentially, you're not making enough ATP, and so you have the anaerobic respiration kick in. Muscles contract in a response to a stimulus, so like a nerve signal being sent, from your motor neurons to that muscle, telling the muscle to contract. And it doesn't matter what the strength of the stimulus is, the muscle will always respond the same way to every stimulus. However, you can obviously have stronger contractions. So I can just lightly flex my bicep, or I can really strongly flex my bicep. So I can control how much that muscle is contracted. We don't do that by increasing the strength of the stimulus. So my brain is still sending the same stimulus, but my brain is sending more of the stimulus. So it's not a stronger stimulus, it's more stimuli that's going to that muscle. And that is called summation. It's adding all of those stimuli that are sent together to create a stronger response. As you guys know from math, sum means to add. So summation is just adding all of those stimuli together to get a stronger response. In this case, a stronger contraction. So this is what summation looks like. So I can set one stimulus and then the response will be, that's strong. If I send a bunch of stimuli in a row, they get added together to create a stronger response. There are two different types of muscle fibers, specifically two different types of myosin. You can have type 1 myosin, which are also called slow twitch, or type 2 myosin, which are called fast twitch. Type 1 myosin, the slow twitch muscle fibers, as the name suggests, move more slowly, but they use ATP more efficiently, so they're using their energy more efficiently. Type 2 myosin, the fast twitch muscles, can move more quickly, but they're not as efficient at using the ATP energy. So if someone is really into endurance sports or marathon running, then type 1 myosin is really beneficial because they're going to be able to use their ATP energy more efficiently. However, if someone needs explosive energy, like with sprinting, where you need a lot of energy but not for a long period of time, then the fast twitch muscle fibers are a lot more beneficial because you can move those muscles a lot more quickly, even though you can't keep the endurance up for as long because it's not as efficient. The average person does have about equal amounts of the fast and slow twitch muscle fibers. People who are more inactive tend to have more of the fast twitch and less of the slow. Olympic sprinters have way more of the fast twitch muscles, whereas marathon runners in the Olympics have way more slow twitch muscle fibers. And things like training and fitness can make a person a better athlete, obviously. But the ratio of your slow to fast twitch muscle fibers is actually largely genetic. So you can't just train to get more fast twitch muscle fibers or train to get more slow twitch muscle fibers. A lot of that is just genetic. Okay, then we get to the motor system, which just is the name for all of the skeletal muscles, your bones, your joints, and ligaments. Anything that allows you to move is part of your motor system. The joints are just the different bones that come together to increase mobility, so like your shoulder or your wrist, anything like that. Ligaments then connect different bones, so like your forearm bones connect into your upper arm bones. Those would be done by ligaments. Muscles do require an adequate amount of protein in your diet in order to be maintained. So if you don't get enough protein in your diet, your body will start essentially like eating away at your muscles in order to get that protein. And of course, you also need exercise in order to maintain your muscles. If you don't use your muscles, you will lose them. Okay, so that's it for this lesson, but I am going to go back to the sliding filament theory with a brief flowchart. Okay, so here is a summary of the sliding filament theory. So we start with a nerve releasing a neurotransmitter. That neurotransmitter travels to the muscle's endoplasmic reticulum and causes the endoplasmic reticulum to release calcium ions. Those calcium ions then go and bond to the troponin, which is attached to the tropomyosin, and it pulls the tropomyosin away from the actin, which then opens up a binding site on the actin. Meanwhile, ATP binds to myosin, which causes the myosin to reach out and the ATP to break apart into ADP and phosphate. When that myosin reaches out, it then goes and binds onto that open binding site on the actin, and then the myosin pulls the actin backwards. As it does that, the ADP and the phosphate is released. It's done its job, it's used up its energy, and the muscle contracts because the actin is pulled backwards, shortening the spaces between the Z lines. Once the muscle contracts, the myosin is going to release the actin and everything is going to relax again. Okay, please let me know if you have any questions about that.